Hi, welcome to Whale Wednesday and Humpback Chronicles. Most of our whale trust work is done in Maui in Hawaii, and and it's a great place to work in the winter, and I love being there every year. But it's summertime in Auk Bay, Alaska, and though we're looking at the same whales, they're doing really different stuff. I first came to Alaska in 1986 to shoot humpback whale feeding for a big story that was going to be in the centennial issue of National Geographic. I spent 6 weeks living on a little rock in southeast Alaska looking for whales feeding, and we knew they did it sometimes. In 6 weeks, I saw it once. Last 34 years, a lot has changed with whales and whale feeding. For one thing, there are a lot more whales, and we know a lot more about whale feeding. Since the late 90s, groups like Alaska Whale Foundation have studied cooperative feeding and bubble net feeding, and it's one of the things people really get excited about when they come to Southeast Alaska. Sometimes where we live at our home in Auk Bay, we even see whales feeding right in front of the house. One of the things that led to the successful recovery of humpback whales is that their versatility. They can eat a number of different things in a number of different ways. But probably one of the most exciting things, one of the most behaviors you see in the natural world is the cooperative feeding or bubble feeding of whales on small prey. For photographers and probably whale watchers, I think the most exciting thing is seeing cooperative feeding, bubble net feeding, where they're trapping fish near the surface, and you've got a number of whales working together in a choreographed routine to trap and eat these small fishes. And though cooperative feeding or bubble net feeding on fish is dramatic and interesting and easy for us to see, it is only part of the story, and humpback whales can do a number of different things. Where we are, you can see the same group of whales uh, spending the day feeding on fish on the surface and cooperative feeding, and then later in the day, possibly when the deep scattering layer, the plankton comes up, be feeding on the surface and feeding on krill. I had barely established myself at National Geographic as a whale photographer. I'd done whales and sharks and big things. And for some reason, one of my early stories was to do krill. And are really important. I mean, the base, the number of animals that are feeding on krill, and krill are plankton, but they're little shrimp-like animals that are in big numbers, and not just whales, but seals, fish, a number of things that eat krill. Of course, the challenges of trying to photograph krill, especially in places like the Antarctic. We worked with scientists and got a nice story that came out in 1984. We measured stories every year to see what the readership likes the most. And in the surveys in 1984, there were about 70 stories, and krill was number 68. Krill was definitely the least popular story I ever shot for National Geographic. Really important, but certainly doesn't have the same charismatic appeal that things like humpback whales do. I'd love to do another story on krill. It's just so amazing how much of a food source they are. Sometimes up in the Aleutians where we were working, you'd see almost a thick paste on the surface and really easy for whale feeding. Here's a mother and young humpback whale going along, just scooping mouthful after mouthful of this rich source, all these krill, and not just important to whales and to birds and to fish, but there's also a human use. And when we were doing the story in 1984, one of those things was looking at the krill fishery in the Antarctic and using krill for protein meal, for chicken feed. It's just important for the whole food chain, from human beings to benthic creatures that are probably catching krill when they're driven down towards the bottom by the whales. But anyway, enough of krill. And though krill and whales feeding on krill will never beat the drama of humpback whales feeding on fish in southeast Alaska, I think one of the wonderful things about falling in love with humpback whales and having them be such a great iconic animal is the realization that you don't get to have humpback whales without the rest of the system working well. So a working system, a good ecosystem, isn't just good for whales, it's also really good for us. It's a cool, quiet, rainy day in southeast Alaska. Summer's just coming here. Of course, it's much quieter than usual. There are no cruise ships, far fewer people. And we're really wondering what it's going to be like this year. What will the whales be doing? Where will they be? What will they be doing differently, if anything? Uh, but we'll be out there looking. I think that part of the mix, part of having successful whales in Hawaii to look at and lots of babies in Hawaii comes from having whales a successful season in the summer up here, whether they're eating krill or whether they're eating small fish. Uh, if they don't have a good summer in Alaska, we're not going to see them down south. So we'll keep looking. This week's Humpback Chronicles may sound a little different. I'm having sort of a computer disaster up here, but a new computer's on the way and should be here this week, and we should be back to normal or maybe better. Anyway, this is Flip Nicklin from Auk Bay, Alaska, with Humpback Chronicles, and thank you all for your help and your support, and we'll hope to see you next week. Bye-bye.